When journalists talk about war, why do we always frame it in terms of winners and losers? Why are there always victims and aggressors? And why do we, the public, as news consumers, pick sides so easily? And why do we assume that governments are either good or bad and nothing in between? So it's pretty clear that Russia is the aggressor in its war against Ukraine, right? It's hard to find anyone who would disagree. But when we say Russia is the aggressor, Russia, who are we actually talking about? Vladimir Putin? Russian soldiers? Russian people? The aggressor here is obviously Putin. Soldiers are obeying orders. Now, the blind obedience that we demand of soldiers is something I talk about in full in my recent podcast episode. But many Russian people are also clearly against the war. So can we just stop saying Russia is the aggressor and let's blame the person, in this case Putin, and not some nebulous entity that means a million different things to different people. Now, on the flip side of that, journalists often talk about Ukraine as the victim. But what does that mean? A country is an abstraction. It's not a living, breathing being. It can't feel pain. It can't be a victim. People are real. People feel pain. People are victims. And in this war, it's clear that many Ukrainian people are victims, and also some Russian people are victims. But here's the important point. I don't think politicians are ever victims, or at least the standard should be pretty high if we want to call them that. Our current infatuation with Vladimir Zelensky is really problematic. He's not a superhero or sex god. He's a politician. He was elected to lead his country. He deserves our compassion, absolutely, but this is his job to protect his people. We shouldn't overly value him for doing what he was elected to do. Sure, fending off an army is not normal day a task for an elected official, but that doesn't really matter. Leaders defend, and they don't need to be called heroes just because they do that. Remember how George W. Bush and Rudy Giuliani were beloved for so long, only because they were leaders when 9/11 happened. Americans rallied behind them because they presented themselves as defenders of the American way, which they were. But that's what they also always do. Politicians do that. Elected officials do that anyway. That's what elected people do. We shouldn't hold them in this high esteem solely because they are leaders in a moment of crisis. We should, in fact, do the opposite. We should demand more of them, not more of the same. If leaders surprise us with intellectual prowess or creative problem solving, or if they do something unexpected or successful, and which leads toward peace and unity, not more war, then, only then, maybe would they deserve our praise. I don't know why we always hold up the defender or the underdog as a hero in war for that fact alone. Wars never happen for no reason. They're never completely unprovoked. Now, Putin's reasons for going to war are obviously suspect, but NATO has been increasing its presence in Europe for decades. They've also ramped up sales and gifts of weapons to NATO countries and Ukraine, all while Putin has been complaining that he considers these a threat. Now, imagine if Russia was setting up missile facilities in Mexico and Canada and selling Mexico and Canada tanks, missiles, and rockets. Wouldn't we see that as threatening to our way of life? Just because Putin is the aggressor, it doesn't make Zelensky a hero. Hell, he appeared in last year's Pandora Papers for shady business practices, but that story flew completely under the radar. I'm not saying Zelensky's evil. I'm merely saying he's not a hero, because in war, there are no true winners. Now, there are a gazillion quotes out there about war and how terrible it is, but I really like this one by British philosopher Bertrand Russell. He says, "Of all evils of war, the greatest is the purely spiritual evil. The hatred, the injustice, the repudiation of truth, the artificial conflict." It's so true. Truth is so fleeting in war. And conflicts are created and magnified by journalists who, while well-intentioned, fall into that overly simple two sides narrative and forget that there are victims on all sides, that there are manipulators on all sides, and opportunists on all sides, and aggressors on all sides. Let's be a little more considerate and deliberate when we talk about war. Let's only hold up a leader who surprises us with their intellect and whose actions make real, genuine progress toward peace and unity, and not more conflict. Maybe that will help us understand the depths of war a little bit better and maybe avoid future conflict. And by encouraging actions that lead to peace, we might just encourage leaders to more aggressively seek peace in the prelude to war. If you want to hear more, check out the full episode of Baffled with David DesRoches. That's me. It's a podcast seeking justice in journalism, and you can listen to it wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what you hear, please leave us a review on Apple, Spotify, or Google, and don't forget to follow me on Twitter at SavingEJ. And you can also keep up with all the awesome podcasts that we're making over here at Quinnipiac University by following us on Twitter at QU Podcasts and on Instagram, also at QU Podcasts. You're being baffled with David DesRoches. Thanks for listening, and I hope you heard.